Hey, everybody, and welcome to our live stream. We're really excited to have you. We're going to be spending a little bit of time talking about how we design assessments in the ChatGPT era. This is something that I spend a lot of time on. And by the way, let me do a quick introduction to myself if we've not had a chance to engage before, if this is your first webinar of ours. So my name is Jim Wagstaff, and I'll just share a little bit of my background and how I'm coming to this subject. Very specifically, I spend a lot of my time doing workshops like this and AI boot camps. We're very privileged to work with groups like the Principals Academy in Singapore. I teach a course on embedding these sorts of technologies in teaching and learning through Singapore Management University. We just recently completed the AI Institute for this academic year in the American Association of Colleges and Universities, and we'll be doing that in the next academic year. So bottom line is I really spend a lot of time thinking about this in addition to the work that I do as a co-founder of Noodle Factory. And so that's why we wanted to bring this to you. This is a constant challenge. It's sort of a race to stay caught up in what's happening. So I just wanted to share a few new ideas and insights that I've come across and have picked up from educators that I've had the opportunity to work with. Before we get into the content, and because I often forget to do this, let me just share with you the QR code and the link to our AI Educator Network. If you are interested in kind of joining up with groups that are, I'd say birds of a feather group, where we're all sort of on the same journey, I'd encourage you to join that. It's just a Facebook group, and we try to share best practices as often as we can, and experiences and ideas. So with that, let me talk to you about some of the challenges that are probably a little bit obvious to you in the era in which we find ourselves. Today, AI-generated content is both a blessing and a curse. It is, if you think that your assignments are AI-proof, there is no such thing anymore. Students are using AIs to produce really sophisticated, not only essays, but output, and it short circuits or shortcuts the learning process. So one of the things I'll encourage you to consider in our conversation today is emphasizing process much more over product, because product is easily produced. Process, on the other hand, is a little more difficult to replicate, and depending on how we assess the process, here's where the trick is, we can be at least AI conscious in what we're doing, and potentially a bit more AI resistant in the sorts of assignments that we're putting out there. As we'll look at too, there's a real potential for over-reliance on AI to the point that critical thinking becomes a thing of the past. That might seem like an overstatement, but there's this over-reliance on the technology that can dramatically diminish some of our core skills when it comes to critical thinking. I liken this to our reliance today on things like GPS, where for most of us, especially if we live in an urban environment, we are in a situation where we may not have good orientation skills anymore, or orienteering skills, I should say. And so we've sort of lost that. And critical thinking, we don't want that to be put on the waste heap of history thanks to AI. That's something that we want to protect. And thirdly, authenticity is an issue. So how do we put students in a situation that through the assignments and the assessments that we offer, they're able to demonstrate a more authentic version of learning? In other words, closer to maybe cross-curricular or real-world engagement with the learning. And all of this leads to point 4, which is we have an opportunity to use the AI tools that we have at hand as an opportunity for innovation. Now, just as we start to look at and unpack this subject and a few of the examples, something that if you've been on probably any one of our live streams before, you've heard me say this, the world of AI, specifically in ed tech, is really crowded right now. Over the last 2.5, 3 years, it has become exceptionally crowded, particularly over the last 2 years, where there are thousands of potential directions that you can go, even in ed tech, not to mention just the broader generative AI world. And so even if you narrow that down to maybe the few tools, and in my case, I have maybe a dozen tools that I use regularly, even if you narrow that down, it can become really hard to decide what's best, what's fit for purpose. But that is the challenge. And if you, like I do, get the question, which AI tool is the best? I don't have a good answer for you. It's the tool that's best for the purpose that you're aiming to serve or the outcome that you're aiming to deliver. And that's a bit of what we're going to cover today. Now, given that we have a wide variety of people who have registered for this live stream, I know that because I took a look at the registration. I'm going to break up our approach in a slightly different way today. So you can look at this as maybe primary, secondary, university, college, and then workplace learning. But I'll do it just in terms of age groups today. So we'll have some thinking and some examples around children, younger children, where they may be more comfortable learning through play and exploration. For the youngest of these children, the keyboarding skills might not quite be there. So this may be more of a teacher-led engagement around certain approaches and assignments if we choose to use AI at all. For teens, here there's a developmental process around abstract reasoning, critical thinking, and a need to do some exploration and give a sense of autonomy. So we'll explore that and give some examples. For young adults, where this might typically be university, college, vocational school, early in career learners. So this is much more about career and career-oriented skills, not just with AI, but the types of skills and practical applications that these types of learners are really just getting to grips with. For older learners or adult learners, this is much more around self-direction, around integration with life experience, problem or project-centered learning, and a need to be immediately relevant with these sorts of learners. So across these different skill levels, if we were to take those age groups, we also have to contend with the fact that we have different levels of skill and levels of need across each one of these groups, whether we're talking about beginner, intermediate, or advanced. And so in some ways, there's a need for differentiation. And this is an area on the content creation, tool creation, administrative side of the equation that we can leverage AI, even if we never release AI into the wild with our learners. And so we'll kind of differentiate, no pun intended there, between the approaches that we can take with that approach that's more about us versus things that are much more about our learners. So here are some key principles that I'd like to share with you before we dive a little bit deeper, and of course before we get into some of the hands-on examples that you may want to try. If you've got some of these tools handy, you may want to follow along and try these things with me. But these are the 4 A's, our principles for designing today's effective assignments. And then I'll share with you some decision points that we might have to make if we take a look at our existing lesson plans, our existing assignments, just to see if they pass muster in terms of this world in which we're operating. So firstly, what we need is authenticity. I touched on this a little bit earlier. We need to, as much as we can, leverage the power of generative AI to get learners closer to real-world scenarios, things that they will encounter in their education or in work, and that will increase the engagement because the perceived relevance and therefore the authenticity of the learning and the assignments that we're providing goes way up. Accessibility is also a key point that we need to consider. So we'll look at some examples of accessibility needs that students might have, the more traditional accessibility needs and things that we can do, but also just the diverse preferences and needs that learners have. Thirdly is agency. So how do we create assignments that really feel like we're giving choice to learners? And I think you're really going to like this, because here's where emphasizing process versus product becomes very, very real. So we're going to flip the script, if you will, on a lot of the use of AI that you might have encountered in the past, creating content or even creating tools, to really get students to do a lot of that work themselves and to be very self-directed and to have agency in this area. And finally, we will look to create more AI-resistant assignments and even assessments. So this is about emphasizing process, yes, but also output that requires a bit of human creativity that's difficult for AI to replicate, requires personal reflection, something that is kind of difficult for AI to do today if we look closely enough, and hyper local or hyper relevant and authentic context that AI just doesn't have the ability to replicate because it doesn't exist in its training data set. And so those are the sorts of design principles that we'll use as we get into the subject. So let's first unpack this a little bit more deeply with the types of learners that we're talking about. So if you happen to be an educator who's working with younger learners, so we'll use a fairly wide range of 5 to 12. So you can imagine the differences in strategies that you would need for a 5-year-old versus a 12-year-old. But rather than micro segment that, here we're primarily thinking about things like hands-on exploration, storytelling and role play, which is particularly good for learners of any age, but for younger learners, there's some very creative things that we can do there. Thinking about how gamification can be a key part of what we rely on for AI to maybe brainstorm with us on, develop content, maybe even develop micro applications or HTML-oriented applications that are very easy to develop and deploy for our students in the classroom or beyond. And then also things like getting students to do a visual documentation. So in the assignment, maybe drawing conclusions, literally drawing conclusions, doing photo journals, doing video demonstrations, doing podcasts, these sorts of things, or video podcasts, and making sure that we have multiple options in our assignments for students to engage. Some of the strategies that we might undertake for teen learners. Here, these learners are probably looking to express their unique identity, establish a personal style or a voice, and to let that shine through. If you're in doubt about this, maybe ask an AI, your choice of AI, your favorite AI, what are some ideas on how I can allow my teen students to express themselves and to develop real-world connections, more of a community, more authentic tasks that take classroom concepts and bring that out to the wider world. Thirdly, are there social collaboration elements that I can bring in? Can I use an AI to moderate or to encourage social interactions? So we do this at Noodle Factory in our application by using things like Microsoft Teams as a messaging platform that allows multiple learners to engage and to engage an AI in project work and conversations. And this is really good for teens, especially if they get stuck or if they need that extra little bit of support. And so that's where the technology integration can play a small part, but also getting teens through assignments to explore the creation of tools or media or the assessment and evaluation of the media and the output in rich media that they create. So that's a couple of things to consider. If we're talking about young adults and adult learners, this is an area where, as we mentioned, we want to be much more pragmatic in providing problem-based learning, maybe case-based learning, project-based learning, opportunities for reflective practice, which some learners in this space might feel a barrier to doing that. AI can act as sort of a learning buddy or a reflection buddy through interviews, through encouragement to drive reflection in particular areas, to make that process of reflection seem just that little bit less onerous. And then self-directed projects where we are looking for an output, but we're also looking for students to demonstrate the process on how they got to where they did in the delivery of a product, as well as the sorts of ways that we get students to maybe design their own projects. So taking a bit of the pressure off of you to come up with all of the answers and all of the approaches, allowing students of this age range a bit more autonomy. So let's talk about some of the ways that we want to overcome, for many of you, a digital divide that is getting worse. And I just want to spend a moment on this because as we sort of rush headlong towards the use of AI in assignments, either the development and or the delivery of assignments, and even potentially the assessment of these assignments, the evaluation of these assignments, we need to recognize that not everyone has access to these tools. One of the things that I've intentionally done today is, while I'm actually using the paid versions of some of the tools, because that's my job, is to use these tools, but nothing that we'll go through today needs a paid version or a subscription to the tools. Any of these things can be accomplished in the free versions of the tools. Now, that being said, there is still a digital divide in many parts of the world where many students do not have access to devices or the internet that would give them high speed or reasonable speed access to these free tools. So recognize that that is the case. Now, I know many of you, you're sort of self-selected in this live stream, so very likely your students already have that sort of access, a device, maybe a laptop, a mobile device with internet access. So that's kind of the first hurdle that we have to overcome. But the emerging digital divide is around access to these AI tools. And so this is something that policymakers will have to contend with in countries rich and those countries that don't have as many resources, in order to make sure that we offer approaches and access to tools and resources that have a level of equity. This is probably a topic for a different day, but if you're in the situation where you have students who are finding themselves facing the digital divide, that chasm of the digital divide, one of the things that you can look to is certainly the free tools. But you can also look to community and corporate partnerships, depending on where you're coming from in the world. It's very likely that the big institutions like OpenAI or Google or Microsoft, Anthropic, that are providing a lot of the very popular tools, will have a free tier that is especially meant for education. So you probably have seen Anthropic and OpenAI in particular have versions of tools that are meant specifically for education. So don't let the digital divide be a barrier, because there are probably ways around that. And maybe that's something that we can talk about in a future session. Okay, so let's start to look at a couple of examples. And one thing that I'll show you in these examples is we may want to assess and evaluate learner progress. That's just a part of assignments. And so one of the things that, in parallel to developing AI conscious or AI enabled or even AI resistant assignments, is the assessment or the evaluation portion of what's going on. So this is an opportunity to take a look at the sort of lessons and assignments that you're already using, and to double check if we've got clear learning objectives that, as you'll see, are not easily met through the use of AI, but we potentially rethink that. Do we have process documentation that allows us to assess the progress, not just the final product, and to give students feedback on that learning journey as they progress towards a learning objective? Very importantly, and I'm going to show you an example of this, have we thought through and built the ability for students to get verbal or visual, I'll add that, evaluation in the process and the product for that assignment or that assessment? And then, are we building in self-assessment and reflection? For students of every age, but particularly for teen learners, young adult learners, have we built in that process of reflection? And is that supporting critical thinking? Are we giving people the space to have a level of metacognition and a level of critical thinking about what they've just done and the next steps and actions and activities that can carry them forward? Okay, so to kind of close off this thought, one thing you've probably heard me talk about before is the notion of integrative assessment. So this is something much more at a micro level, below formative and certainly summative assessment, where at every step in the journey, this is something that AI gives us the opportunity to do, to have these integrative assessments that are very, very micro, very subtle signals that we can pick up on if students are operating in a tool in which we have a dashboard or we're able to pick up on these signals. I would encourage you to think about ways to do that. So there are many tools that offer that. It's something that we've intentionally built into the Noodle Factory platform, but a lot of tools do this. to give you that ability to pick up on potentially weak signals where students might be struggling or maybe they're accelerating. And you can give targeted support and quickly identify where you can either encourage acceleration or quickly identify needs for intervention. So all of this, as we've said, gives us that potential for more authentic assessment, where instead of a what and which pedagogy, which is very traditional, where we're focusing on the knowledge that students have gained and to see whether or not they've retained that, we focus much more on the process, the why and the how, and the journey that students are going on. So I'd like you to take just a minute, and if you are where you can see this, I'm going to put it into full screen so you can see it very clearly. But this is a document that the University of Michigan published, and they've recently updated it. And it's really just a decision tree, or you can think of it like a checklist about how we might need to evolve our assignments and, by extension, our assessments. And if you follow along with this, I'll just sort of highlight a few things. Our starting point is up here at the top. And the question is, does the assignment address a course competency or an essential learning objective? Now, that might seem like a very basic question, but if we're dealing with, I'll call them legacy assignments, this is a chance to do a bit of an inventory on those assignments or even entire lesson plans. If the answer is no, well, the big question is, should we consider dropping that? Or maybe offering that as an ungraded knowledge check or turning it into a class activity where it's not an assignment, but it's something that may support some component of learning, but it isn't really something that is tied to a competency or a learning objective. Now, if the answer is yes, a really important question that we have to ask and answer honestly is, can the AI complete this assessment and pass? If in doubt, try it out. If the answer is no, if you can't reasonably get an AI to complete the assessment or complete the assignment and pass that, then yeah, you can carry on and not change anything on that assignment for now. But if the answer is yes, and particularly where we might be overvaluing the written output of something as a way to assign and assess, the answer may be yes. And so we have to honestly answer the question, well, would the student use of AI undermine their learning? And would it undermine your ability to honestly evaluate that? And if the answer is no, then, well, we can integrate the use of AI in a thoughtful way, in a conscious way, into the assessment. We might have to do a slight change. We might have to change some of the nature of the assignment, but allow the student, give them a green light to use the AI, but highlight within the assignment how AI is meant to support the learning process and encourage students to go down that pathway rather than simply using AI as a shortcut to the output so they can turn the assignment in and get passing marks. Now, if the answer is yes, and surprisingly, maybe not, the answer is increasingly yes in this area, well, we might need to moderate that. So how can we get students to demonstrate learning in another way? That could be in-class activities or where we intentionally do not allow the use of devices. We might have a situation where the use of AI is monitored. Or, and this is one that I'm really a big fan of, we mitigate this. Here's where we become a little more AI resistant. This is a play on the flipped classroom, where we use alternative assessment types and we leverage different types of instructional technology, maybe verbal, video, visual, and allow students to submit assignments, the output of an assignment, along with the process, but in different representations and in different ways that today might seem inaccessible, but what we'll show you in a few examples is this is eminently accessible. We can definitely use different approaches to this type of mitigation. So let me go back to the full screen on that. And if you want to take a screenshot of that, this is something that we can send out as a follow-up to today's live stream. But I find this really useful and interesting. It's fairly straightforward. It's probably not rocket science. You may be doing something like this already, but as a really useful exercise, it kind of forces me to do something that I don't do enough of, which is to think critically about the nature of the assignments and the assessments that are going on. And in fact, I'll show you an example of one where I had to really rethink a particular assignment for some adult learners that I work with, because it just became evident that the assignment was way too easy for AI to replicate. Okay, so let me give you a couple of examples, and then we'll do some live work in some tools. So this is one of my favorite examples where we may want to have what I'll call an AI-assisted assignment or assessment. And this particular topic is on climate change. So if you think about that decision tree that we just used, here we're acknowledging that this type of assignment in the traditional world would be very easy to do if we're collecting data, analyzing data, creating worksheets, maybe creating a presentation, doing a write-up on climate change research, however detailed that might be. That's pretty easy for AI to replicate. But here, we're acknowledging that fact, and we're encouraging students to maybe use tools like Canva Magic Design or the Gemini-enabled version of Google Slides to create the presentation. Because I'm not really assessing the students on the presentation itself or the creation of the presentation. It's more their ability to describe the process on how they got there. For presentations, rather than just submitting a written assignment or presentation, or even just delivering a presentation in front of the class, if this is an individual or a group assignment, maybe one of the things that I can do is get students to practice presentations and to get rubric-based feedback using a tool like Flipgrid or others, where you've got the ability to get feedback on a presentation. And I'll show you a really cool example of this, where I'll give a very short kind of 45-second presentation and get some feedback on my presentation in just a moment. There's another variation on this, though, that I encourage you to think about. This is where we take that same assignment and we make it much more AI resistant. So remember, one of the design principles that we talked about earlier is potentially turning things hyperlocal. So this is the same assignment that you just saw around climate change research, but here we intentionally say, this is not about data that's publicly available. This is about a hyper-local climate change topic. So go and interview people, go and take video, go and research data with the assistance of generative AI, but synthesize that in a hyper-local context. That might be a particular neighborhood or a street. And I'm using Singapore as the example, which is where I live. How is climate change affecting flooding, which we've seen recently, in this particular neighborhood or in this particular street, maybe on your campus? And so we're making that hyper-local, and collect that data, do the interviews, conduct some self-assessment and peer assessment if this is a group project, or even across different assignments. Use Google Slides and the Gemini-enabled version of that to create the presentation. When we're doing group presentations, maybe use AI as a way to get initial feedback. Maybe some of that peer review can come from a peer that's a part of your Microsoft Teams chat group. And then the final presentations and evaluation can use things like chat-based or video-based role plays that are moderated by an AI, and the feedback might actually come from an AI. So let me look at a couple of other examples that I'd like to share with you. And these are things that I've been playing around with, and I want to show you these examples in the real world. So this is an example of where we may want to imagine that we're teaching an advanced level Malay language school to maybe junior college students in Singapore. And you want to assess their mastery of complex Malay verbal structures. This is having worked with language teachers. There's a chasm. I don't speak Malay, but in talking to Malay language teachers, there's often this chasm that needs to be crossed when you move into advanced level learning in the language around particularly nuanced meanings and verbal structures. And you can see here, I've got a prompt that I've put together, and you can see here that this is the first part of the prompt. So imagine you whether it's Gemini, ChatGPT, are teaching this advanced level course. And here are some of the parameters. You want to be culturally relevant to both Malay speaking and Singaporean context. And then some guidelines on the assignment can be completed using digital tools. It can allow for creativity and personal expression, offer flexibility for different proficiency levels within the class, knowing that we, even at this advanced level, are going to have different proficiency levels. And then for each assessment idea, what I'm looking for is an explanation on how it fits with my learning outcomes, my objectives for the course, how this assignment supports that. And I actually ran this prompt, and here's what I got. So really interesting ideas that can all be assessed in big and small ways with AI tools, whether that's creating a short news podcast or delivering a cultural festival proposal, doing some digital storytelling, maybe creating an explainer TikTok or Instagram video. So if you run your eyes down through this, these are all things that kind of fit in that area of authenticity. There's definitely more of a visual or a rich media component to that, but they're all things that we can get AI to help us assess. So let me show you an example from my own practice of this, and I want to just give you a sense of this, knowing that we're running a little bit short on time. Let me show you an example of an assignment that I realized was really easy for AI to complete. If you've been to business school, this is Business Model Canvas, or if you've been in a lot of different environments where you're looking at maybe startups or business models, this will seem very familiar. For many students, though, even adult learners, in my case, the Business Model Canvas is something that's unfamiliar. And so we try to introduce it as a way to look at and analyze a business. And without going into too much detail, on the right-hand side, we've got the customer aspects of a business model. So this is how the value proposition is realized. And then we've got the operational side of the business model. This is a set of things, usually cost-oriented things, that are all done to deliver the value proposition. And then we've got the finances, which are really just a way of keeping score. How efficiently is the business model operating? So there you go. There's a 30-second explanation of the business model canvas. So let me flip over to a browser, and I want to show you an example of how easy it is to complete a business model canvas analysis. So I might want to say conduct. In fact, let me use my voice. Probably easier to do this with my voice, and I'm going to be doing a couple of other examples with my voice. Conduct a business model canvas analysis of the company New Balance, the company that is in the business of athletic shoes and athletic wear. So we'll put that into ChatGPT, and this would work with the free version as well. Oh, wow. Okay, so it's giving me a little bit more than I expected. But this is exactly what we would expect from a student, is to go and do this analysis. So really good. I mean, probably better, certainly, than a student would do in their first pass in doing this business model canvas analysis. So you can see that's really easy. And if I'm just looking for the output on this, then it sort of defeats the purpose. So now, when I do this assignment, I encourage students to use the tools of their choice, whether it's ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini, Claude. So go ahead and shortcut, get the analysis from the AI. But what I want is your critique, and I want you to spot the gaps in the analysis that the AI tool has done. So what I'm looking for there is more the process. What is the thought process and the critical thinking that the student is bringing to this analysis of the business model canvas? Now, the contrarian in me says, well, you could probably use AI for that. And I'm sure you could. You could get ChatGPT now to do a critical analysis of this business model canvas. But this is where we tend to try to do this more with verbal presentations or video presentations or as a classroom activity or small group activity, so that it's much harder to replicate that using AI. If you're in a virtual environment, if a student really was being resistant to actually participating in the assignment, I suppose they could uh, even live use an AI tool. But as best we can, we try to mitigate that and create an AI conscious assignment where we encourage the use of AI in a particular way. Okay, so let's start to bring this in for a landing. I just want to show you one more example. It's something that we've visited in previous sessions. This is something we also spend a lot of time on when we do our AI boot camp. So participants have a chance to build everything that you've just seen and do this in sort of a free-form way. But we also spend a lot of time doing things like role plays and language learning and different types of learning. So let me just quickly show you a role play as a debate partner specifically, and kind of give you a sense of how that might work, and then we'll bring this in for a landing. So if I come over here, so this is the Noodle Factory platform, and let me just make that a little bit smaller so you can see everything. One of the things that we can do pretty easily is to set up different role plays and quizzes. You can see here we've got some role plays already set up, and we'll just go ahead and create one as a sample. So we might want to call this the tariff role play. Am I misspelling tariff? I should know how to spell tariff. It's been in the news enough, hasn't it? There we go. So do this as a role play. And what we're going to do is now describe this role. So let's say the AI assistance role might be the let's say the Singapore Minister for Trade. And the learner role is maybe a business leader. And what we want to do is, let's say, a business leader who is interested in ensuring cross-border trade. Let's say that. And the Singapore Minister for Trade interested in ensuring minimal tariffs. And then I don't have any references on this. I don't have any documents that I've uploaded. So we'll just say, let's have a debate. The best way to ensure free flow of goods and services. So not a great set of prompts, but I can get some assistance from this, from the AI, to go ahead and round out this role play. And then what that would allow me to do is, in this case, what I'd likely do is I'd make sure that, here we go, so we've got our improved prompt there. So what I would likely do is have learners record themselves using their voice in the language of their choice, but using their voice to engage in this sort of debate. So if I jump over here to the learner view and say, let's have a role play, it should give me a choice of role plays, so that we've got our tariff role play, and it'll go ahead and kick that off. And so now, using my voice or even my keyboard, then I can begin to engage in this role play. So let's debate tariffs. All right, so we're ready to go. I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but just wanted to give you a sense of how we could go ahead and set that up and make that something that is really quick and easy, but also make it AI resistant, in the sense that instead of just doing this as a normal assignment, we're getting the student to engage using their voice. Okay, so a couple of last things to think about as we sort of round out this topic, because I've thrown a lot at you, and hopefully you're taking away some ideas from this. There are some approaches that we need to evolve in terms of our attitudes and our direction on the use of AI in assignments, whether that's just for us or with students. And I think a couple of things to call out here. One thing that has been a bit problematic is we need to normalize AI disclosure. So I think in the workplace, this has become a lot more normal. People are used to using generative AI to do the sorts of things that they need to in order to accomplish their job, to get to the right outcomes. We haven't done this as well in education. So part of this is the need for AI literacy, particularly amongst educators and amongst students. You are a self-selected group, so you probably have worked on this on your own. But as we've seen today, there's a need to redesign assignments and to offer more authentic assessments. One thing that we don't have time to go into today is there are ways that we can spot certain red flags where students might be skirting the policies that we may or may not have developed. That's another key gap that I often see in working with schools. And then we need to be open to addressing the negatives, but at the same time, embrace the positives that come along with this sort of engagement and work that we're doing with AI for ourselves and with our students. So hopefully that gives you some ideas on the sorts of things that you can begin to put in place. If you're interested in maybe checking out the AI Bootcamp, we have a fully online version of the AI Bootcamp that has lots of these hands-on assignments and really gives you the latitude to go in and explore and kind of play around in the context of your own classroom. Let us know. Also, let me just share with you the link again and the QR code to our AI Educator Network. If you're interested in joining that, we often have discussions around various approaches that we can take around assignments and assessments. So hopefully that gives you some food for thought. We'd love to hear how you're approaching assignments in your own work, in your own practice. Maybe do that via the Educator Network or via the comments section on the video. But we look forward to seeing you in the very near future in another live stream that we have coming up in May, which will be specifically around onboarding. So more of a workplace learning concern and a real opportunity to leverage AI. So that will be, I think it's on May 19th. Don't hold me to that date, but it's around that date, May 19th. And we'll be talking to a subject matter expert in this area on the topic of onboarding in a workplace learning environment. All right. Thanks very much, everybody, and we will see you very soon. Hey, thank you so much for joining us today. If you liked what you heard, if you found it useful, please make sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the content that we publish on a weekly basis. Also, head over to our website at noodlefactory.ai. There's tons of free resources there that focus on teaching and learning with AI. Make sure to subscribe, make sure to stay involved, join our community of practice and play, which is in our Facebook group, where we talk about really practical and useful approaches to using AI in teaching and learning. Until next time, happy noodling.